there are other industries I think transportation could potentially learn from and bring in some principles and concepts and things they tried to implement over the last couple of years. So in transportation specifically, I mean, people actively exploit this stuff. State of Colorado had a pretty big attack not long ago. It's the way ransomware typically works is they try and trick somebody into downloading something, opening an email attachment, and then once it gets into your environment, it tries to spread. When Muni in San Francisco, I think this was 2 years ago now, their ticket vending machines were taken offline for a weekend due to a ransomware attack, but it started in their corporate IT system, and it kind of spreads its way out. It encrypts critical files or entire things on the hard drive, so the machine's basically unusable, and then it gives you a little screen that says, hey, send some Bitcoin to this address, and we'll decrypt your data for you. These systems, a lot of them are run by the Russian mafia, just as a way to make some money. They actually have help desks, support desk you can call and say, I'm having trouble unlocking, paying this ransom, can you walk me through it? And they'll do it. Because they know if people don't get their data back, they're going to be like, well, this thing is lost. I'm not going to bother paying the ransom. So it's actually quite sophisticated. And when the state of Colorado got hit, it was thousands of machines that were taken offline. Colorado a couple of years ago went through an exercise to save some money and consolidate back-end IT systems. They used to have a server room that was about the size of these two conference rooms here, just loaded with IT equipment. By the time they consolidated everything, it was down to about 2 racks. It's about yay tall, yay big, and there's only 2 of them right in the middle of the room. They had all the state email was on that. The primary web servers were running off this stuff. It was pretty incredible. So you can see how as those systems converged, it can be pretty devastating if one of them takes offline. You've got all the back-end email, for example, was lost. So the big thing here is it took the state, this was less than the ransom these guys were asking for, but it was a little over $1 million for them to go through and remediate the damage caused by this ransomware attack. Typically you have to completely wipe and re-image the machines, which the process is pretty easy to do. The state had never considered, how do I do that to all 2,000 machines out there in the workforce at the same time or over the same weekend. It took them weeks to completely recover from this activity. Other things too, I mean, we see these little road signs that get hacked every now and again. I've actually done this myself, and to the point about, it was in a controlled environment, it was with permission of the owner, those kinds of things. But it was very easy to do because I walked up, I looked at the name of the machine and the model number, and I Googled it. And I got the default password, which was just a series of digits, and then there's a little keyboard, and I could just type in whatever I wanted. The control panel didn't even have a lock on it, even though there was a little loop where you could stick a lock in. So for $2, you could have prevented that attack, in theory. But, so the Huffington Post made a really good point, though, that even while this didn't affect safety systems, traffic systems, anything like that within CDOT's infrastructure, the next state might not be so lucky. Who wants to be the next state? Nobody. We got to start taking this stuff seriously, obviously. So what are we talking about in the target environment? You have your ITS systems, of course. The operational technology is what I'm talking about. Anything that's not a computer you sit down and do your emails and browse the web from. These are things that sit in operations and control centers. They might control the fire alarm systems, building management systems, tolling systems, all this stuff that you have out in your infrastructure. But as things get connected, somebody back in the corporate office wants to monitor these through the enterprise information systems, for example. So you have this connectivity that didn't exist. Even as short as 5 years ago, a lot of these OT systems were considered closed in nature. Because they're closed, they're safe. Well, that's not the case anymore. One of the big things we find when we go out and do assessments for clients, there are a lot of undocumented connections because the guy sitting at the corporate office doesn't want to drive down to the bus depot. He's tired of going out to the op center across town, and they set up some kind of little connection, which if you've done any work for the federal government, nothing's more permanent than a temporary connection. It'll be there for 20 or 30 years once this stuff gets out there because it's useful. So you've got your email systems, business applications, payroll systems are out there potentially. Websites, of course, and this is where subscribed services and things start coming from. Some of you may work for organizations that have gone from Microsoft Office that's installed on your machine or Outlook that's installed on your machine and it's now in the cloud, or you use OneDrive. We see a lot of this too with payment card systems, for example. A customer goes to the website, they want to buy a ticket, they want to pay their toll bill or whatever it is. That gets sent to a third-party provider to actually do the charge to the credit card company. And then it gets settled up later on. So you have all these subscribed services that happen. And then, of course, all the vendors off to the right. This is where we see a lot of risk and exposure to these critical systems. A couple of rail agencies here in the US, they actually have remote vendors that they don't have a lot of oversight over. But these guys come in and they do remote maintenance sometimes in the evenings, and changes aren't appropriately coordinated by the agency because the agency is assuming the vendor is going to do the right thing and be safe. And the vendor just wants to do what they're getting paid to do, and they're going to do it as quickly and as cheaply as possible in most cases. So we've seen control systems taken offline by an update that was done that was not coordinated at a bad time. And if the timing's off, it's during a thunderstorm, a snowstorm like we have in Colorado. Now the control people are thinking it's a weather-related event, and it's not. And they waste time off trying to troubleshoot some of these things. So these are just normal operational type concerns you have in these environments. And when you add in a cyber component, if somebody intentionally, willfully, maliciously wants to get out and cause some trouble in this type of a connected environment, it can be very, very difficult to figure out what's going on, let alone know what to do about it. So related targets, it's not just the one sign. A lot of people go out and hack these things, but there's always a game of one-upsmanship in the hacking community. People want to show off, pull off a grander attack. So people are already bored with these kinds of signs. They're looking at bigger things along the highway. They're looking at public information systems in airports, railway stations. There's a guy on YouTube. He finally got in a little bit of trouble, but if you YouTube hacking Dutch railways, you see this guy with his laptop. He's figured out through the website where he just gets timing and scheduling information. He can do what they call an SQL injection attack. He puts data into a database in a way that the system designer didn't intend, and he's able to update platform information on the train displays. Doesn't sound like that'd be a big deal, but he realized when you do that, an automated system will then make an announcement in the train station that the train to the airport is now on track 2. And so he does this, he's in the corner giggling, and you watch all these people get up, and they walk over to the other platform. And then he puts them all back, and then he goes and he asks some guy, he's like, hey, which train are you taking? You're going where? Oh no, you're going to the airport now. And he makes a change, and train 6 is going to the airport. So it's kind of funny, kind of humorous, but then you get into the real world, you get into something more malicious. What happens if you update some of these signs, like let's say along all the highways here in LA, and it says, chemical attack, seek shelter. Or one that some foreign governments are concerned about, where they have more, I used to do some classified work for the US government. There's certain details that you can't share, obviously, in a public forum, but there are concerns that there would be an explosive or something put in like a railway station or at a choke point at a stadium or something like that, and you can use these public information displays, fire in the building, exit out the right side, and force a crowd to go into that narrow area, then do some really serious damage. So even while these types of things are kind of funny, there's definitely some very serious consequences should somebody want to do something a lot more malicious. And then of course, just related targets, as we were talking about cars get connected, you very quickly get into personal information, names, addresses, dates of birth, all kinds of things, just as we see these systems starting to talk more and share data amongst themselves. There was a guy there in the orange, had a quote, who worked for NERC-CIP, and he said, hey, we got to remember we can't get into a compliance culture, because compliance does not equal security. You can get in your car, put on your seatbelt, have your airbags, everything's perfectly maintained, and still get into a serious accident. And that's kind of the way we're going with cybersecurity. There are going to be attacks, just like there are building fires or any other kind of problem that you see in the real world. Cybersecurity nowadays needs to be just part of operations. It's part of design. This is how we work, this is how we live, and we need to incorporate that going forward. So what would that look like? Well, the Center for Internet Security has what they call their critical security controls. And these aren't necessarily technical controls, but these are operational things, if you will, things that apply to almost any industry, any environment. And so if it's a satellite system, a train system, an ITS system, whatever it is we're looking at, we're kind of taking an assessment or an inventory against these types of controls. And when you go look at PCI DSS, you go look at what the DoD does, all of them follow pretty much these basic things. So if you and your organizations are doing 3 or 4 of these already, that's great. You're off to a good start, because a lot of organizations don't. It starts right at the top, just knowing what you have in your environment. We have a very large rail client that didn't have a good inventory of what was out in the field. And you think about, the wayside, you see these little huts that have controllers for the radio systems that talk to the trains, the signaling systems, the interlocks that report status of track alignment and all that stuff. There was old equipment that was still in huts that wasn't removed when new equipment was put in. It could still be powered on, it could still be used. So we went out and did an assessment of a lot of this for this particular rail client, but if you don't know what you have, you can't protect it, unfortunately. And of course, that's critical for identifying unauthorized devices. So once that attacker gets in and he compromises something, he makes a change to it or installs his own equipment or her own equipment, you need to be able to detect that almost right away. I won't read through all of these, but things just secure configurations. Don't use the default passwords. Don't use the same password in your operational system you do in the IT system. Because when we hack those IT systems, that's one of the first things we do is look for a file called passwords in a user's folder, where we figure out what your weak password is. You log into your corporate IT machine, turn right around and try that password on the ITS system we're trying to log into. And often they're the same, unfortunately. And then moving down the list, the top half is probably the more basic stuff that hopefully you do is just a foundational type security program. Getting down into the bottom half, you get some more advanced monitoring and detection type things. There are intrusion detection systems that are out there. You can implement incident response programs, which CDOT clearly didn't have, for example, and the ransomware was able to spread through their entire environment. We had another client in Colorado who actually had ransomware, got to a couple of user workstations and started to spread to a server, and they were smart enough to physically run in and unplug the server from the network so it couldn't spread further throughout the enterprise. So there are things that you need to have plans, you got to have it ready to go if one of these events occurs in your organization. And then you get into more, obviously hiring organizations like mine who can come in and actually do a penetration test for you, a vulnerability assessment for you. We'll try and evaluate what are the threats, what's the risk, what vulnerabilities do you have. And when you start to pair those vulnerabilities with what capabilities attackers have, then you can really start to evaluate what is the risk to your organization specifically. Cyber is pretty fascinating because the attackers, of course, we hear about China, North Korea, Russia, all these, but it can go all the way down to a kid in Ukraine who just got a laptop for his birthday, can do damage.